Hey everyone, DM Xavier here. If you're enjoying the content on this channel, please click the like button below, subscribe, share, and don't forget to click the bell icon to ensure you get notifications as soon as I upload new content. Without further ado, let's begin. Episode 4, Part 3, The Sunken Ruins. When the group awoke from their naps, they stood and adjusted their gear before removing the barricades from the door of the room that they'd just slept in. Once in the hallway, they moved for the only remaining door on the west end. Breesis crouched and listened. On the other side of the door, she heard the soft whimpering of a creature that, judging by the pitch of its voice, was one of the small folk. I think there's a goblin, or some other small creature in there. Something's crying, whimpering really, but it sounds small. I think either a goblin or a halfling, maybe a gnome. Droven and Gash stood shoulder to elbow as Breesis fell back into line. With a quick shove, Droven opened the door that stood before them. Inside was an irregularly shaped, crumbling chamber decorated with crudely executed symbols and glyphs scribed in bright green dye. A large pit in the chamber's center showed evidence of a recent bonfire. A metallic cage in the center of the southern wall contained a gaping hole and stood empty. A small wooden bench, draped with green cloth, stood before the cage, and upon it sat several small objects, trophies of sorts. A bedroll lay near the wooden bench, from which the sounds Breesis had just heard emanated from. The group entered the room and looked around. Heskin glanced up at the symbols on the walls. "Here there be dragons?" he said aloud. Hearing his voice, the creature in the bedroll flipped over suddenly. Before the group sat a tiny creature, no larger than an average halfling. It was clearly reptilian in nature, with dirty copper-colored scales, two small horns that sprouted up from its head, and a face shaped like that of a canine. The creature screeched.
Ah! What are you doing? What do you want? You come for me? You gonna finish me off? Fine. She's gonna do it anyway, so you just do it.
Droven looked the creature over, confused, and asked, "I'm not sure what you're talking about, little one, but we're not here to harm you, or your kind, quite frankly. Is someone coming for you?" The creature, looking relieved, said,
Use Dryle gonna kill me if I don't find her baby, her little pet. If you not gonna kill me, what are you here for?
Breesis approached the creature and kneeled alongside the kobold, making sure to keep her distance in case it lunged. "We're here looking for the goblins that live in the ravine. We found some of them dead in the entryway. I'm assuming your people did that?" she said as she nudged a crude, stone-tipped spear that lay next to the kobold.
Yes, we've been fighting the goblins for a long time now. They come up from the underneath and start a war. Try to kick us out. Try to kill us. But we fight back. Wait, you still looking for the goblins? Meepo can take you. You go and you find the dragon, bring it back so the queen will kill Meepo.
Meepo stood and began to bounce up and down. The rest of the group gathered around the small, now dancing creature. They agreed to help, and within seconds they were being whisked away and down a long hallway. As they walked, signs of life became evident. Kobold sentries, strapped in crude leather armor and wielding spears and shields, walked in pairs along the hallways, barking and yipping to Meepo as he escorted the group. It took only a couple of minutes and a semi-tense standoff between Meepo and one of the larger kobolds holding a spear and shield before the group entered a massive throne room. The room itself was 100 feet long and 20 feet wide. Rows of intricate stone columns stood in pairs along the center of the room. A heavy haze sat in the air as torches burned constantly in the unventilated room. A short throne stood near the western wall, constructed of fallen bits of masonry stacked against an old altar. A small, horned figure in red-dyed robes sat on the throne, and a force of 6 smaller creatures in leather armor guarded her.
Meepo, you gonna come and bring these strangers from the surface into our home? Into my throne room?
The robed female shouted. Meepo quivered momentarily before throwing himself on the floor in front of the throne.
Please, my queen, use Dryle. These people come down here looking for the goblins. They have problems with them. They don't want to harm us. I take them to the goblins, and they promise to bring Calicrix back for you.
Yzdryle stood and looked the group over.
Is this true? You gonna bring my baby back to me?
If it's alright by you, Queen Yzdryle, we'd like to assist you in this. We come seeking answers from the goblins regarding the midsummer and midwinter fruit. If you can give us access to their territory, we'll do whatever we can to get your pet back, Breesis said over the whimpered groveling that Meepo was still displaying. Yzdryle smiled.
Okay, I tell you what. Since Meepo was the one who let my baby get taken in the first place, he's gonna be the one to show you the way. If you bring him back to me, I'm gonna be in your debt. Now, if you can manage to rid the entirety of the temple, above and below, of the goblins, I'll let you pick out one of my magics,
she said, and gestured with an open palm to a series of objects that sat on the top of the crude throne, one of which was a large iron key with the face of a dragon that served as the bow. The group agreed to take on Meepo, who excitedly began to lead them out of the throne room.
One more thing. The outcast in the grove, he's dealing with some dark magics. Be careful, or you'll end up missing like the other surface folk who came down here.
Drovin turned quickly. Wait, Mayor Vunor's children? Were there 4 people that came through here before? Yzdryle nodded.
Yes, they had a knight of the sun god with them, and a sassy elf-born man. Horrible attitude on that one. They came down here a couple of weeks ago and said they had some business with the goblins. Paid for their passage in gold coins, but they haven't been back since.
Drovin's face went limp as he turned around and joined the group. Meepo led the group back through the hallway and into the room they'd found him in. He approached a single wooden door at the northeastern end of the room, which sat locked and barricaded with no less than a half a dozen boards nailing it closed. It took him almost 10 full minutes with a pry bar to get the door open. When he had finally finished, he turned around and looked back at the group.
This is the way to the entrance. The way the goblins take and the other surface dwellers take.
With that, he began leading them down a darkened, narrow corridor with only enough room for a single file line. After 2 quick turns and about 80 feet of hallway, they approached a closed wooden door. Meepo crouched and put his ear to the door and a finger out to the group. He listened intently for a moment before depressing the handle and pushing the door open. The room sat completely silent and void of any light except for that which Heskin's mace provided. The interior was completely empty, stripped long ago of anything valuable, and now only home to rat droppings and crumbled flagstone. On the northern wall sat a single closed wooden door. The group entered and looked the interior over. Fenton and Gash pointed down at the floor. "Do you see this?" Fenton asked.
Yeah, that a big footprint. Look like maybe 6 people come this way recently,
Gash said while holding up 3 fingers. "Guys, I think I can confirm that the other group went this way, maybe a few weeks ago, and a couple of rats have been through here in the last few days," Fenton said, pointing at the ground. "Good, we're on the right path then," Heskin replied while smiling. With that, Meepo happily bounded for the door and swung it open. The group flinched in unison, expecting a trap to trigger on the carefree kobold. Instead, the door simply opened. Inside, dust and odd bits of stony debris and rubble lay scattered on the floor in this 25-foot long and 20-foot wide room. A hallway, only about 10 feet wide, extended north into the darkness. An ornate fountain was built onto the eastern wall. Though cracked, stained, and dry, the fountain's carving of a diving dragon retained its original beauty. A relief-carved stone door depicting 2 intertwined skeletal dragons stood on the western wall. The group entered and began looking around. Heskin approached the fountain and inspected it. "Lots of Draconic in this place," he said, brushing dust off of a small placard that rested on the lip of the fountain. "Nenaria, let there be fire?" he said aloud, which triggered a response from the fountain. With a soft red glow from the mouth of the open dragon, a thick reddish liquid began to form and drip into the basin below. Over the course of a minute, the liquid poured until it became nothing more than a trickle before ceasing. Fenton touched the liquid and held it to the light of Heskin's mace. Smells of cinnamon," he said before tasting just a drop of the liquid. His eyes widened as a single strand of smoke rose from his tongue. Oh my, this is a potion of fire breathing," he chuckled. "I can't believe they just had fountains of this stuff sitting around in the temple. If we can gather some of this in a vial though, it may be useful." Gash removed an old, still-stained potion vial from her bag and scooped up as much of the liquid as she could before stowing it away. While the fountain worked its last bit of magic, Droven and Breesis looked over the door with the skeletal dragons. Meepo, do you know what's behind here? Droven asked.
No, we never go in there. It's got the dragons with no flesh, and no flesh is never good. That's what the Yusdrael says.
Breesis pointed at a set of Draconic Carvings above the door. Meepo, can you read this? She asked.
Tana aman hekamen. It's a saying to make a good magic to open the way. Sounds like a trick to me.
He replied. Droven and Breesis looked at each other. Maybe we should leave this one alone for now. I really don't like the skeletal dragon thing on the door, Droven said. I agree. Plus, if it's some sort of burial chamber or something of the sort, it's best to not disturb it, Breesis replied. The group met again in the center of the room and agreed to move north into the darkened hallway leading from the room with the fountain. Roughly 10 feet down the hallway, Meepo threw a hand up and stopped the group.
Okay. This way right here is where we go for the Goblins' territory.
He pointed at a wooden door that stood against the western wall. And what about that way? Droven pointed further into the darkness to the north. Meepo squinted down the hallway and shrugged.
I don't know. I never go that way. Maybe treasures. Maybe death.
The party discussed the situation briefly and decided that heading north first was a better idea, as they'd already found a couple of valuable things in the ruins and could potentially find more if they looked. And with that, they began north. Within 10 feet, the room opened up ever so slightly, revealing what was obviously a set of 6 old abandoned cells, now empty except for a slew of cobwebs and old broken bits of wall and floor. The group spread out and began searching the open cells. From the furthest cell, Droven shouted to the rest. Huge rat in here, be on the alert! Droven thrust forward with his rapier, impaling the rat before it could land a bite on him. He raised its body into the air and with a single sweep of his short sword, slit the beast's throat before tossing it to the side. Gash shouted from across the hall.
Shit! Yeah! Ass! Stupid rats!
She began swinging wildly at the rat that had just bit her ankle, cutting it down with a flurry of blows. One more here! Breesis hollered from the cell closest to the start of the hallway. She swung down with a dagger, missing the rat completely and losing her grip on the ground, slipping in the process. The massive rat lunged at her, digging its claws into her right arm as it bit down at her throat, tearing a chunk of her obsidian flesh from her body. She cried out in pain. Meepo appeared in the doorway and charged the rat. He reared back and thrust with all of his force, driving the tip of his spear into the creature's abdomen. With that, he lifted it into the air and tossed it off of Breesis. Breesis backed away as quickly as possible as Meepo grabbed her dagger and jumped on the beast, stabbing it wildly in and around the head and neck until it ceased moving. Wow, you saved my life. Thank you, Meepo, Breesis said to the little reptilian.
You so welcome. We need to get the Calicrex. We all need to stay alive,
he replied. Breesis stood and exited the cell. The rest of the group gathered, after gathering the small bits of coin they'd just found in the rubble, and Fenton conjured a handful of magical berries for those wounded to consume, which they did, curing their wounds as well as filling their bellies. The group pushed forward into an opening in the hallway that turned into a 30 by 30 foot room with a cobblestone floor that contained 2 trap doors that were currently blocked open by iron spikes. It was obvious if the tops of the trap doors were flush with the floor, they would have been very difficult to spot. Along the north wall sat a dry fountain with the relief of a dragon breathing down on what appeared to be humanoid creatures below. The west wall was home to a single wooden door, which stood partially ajar. The group began to look around the room, taking extra caution to avoid the 2 pits. Heskin approached the fountain with Gash. This one looks like the other one we saw. Different picture, but maybe something useful like a potion, he said. With that, he wiped the dust from a small placard and squinted to see what was carved into it. Naihunye. Let there be death? That's an odd one. As he finished, the fountain flashed green for a moment before an audible hissing erupted from the dragon's mouth, filling the area around it quickly with a thick, noxious mist. Gash and Heskin began coughing wildly as they struggled to breathe.
It burns! It burns! Burns?
Gash said as though she had just had an epiphany. With that, she pulled out the small vial she'd collected from the previous fountain and quickly quaffed its contents. As Heskin began to fall to his knees, Gash inhaled deeply and instinctually coughed, causing a burst of orange flames to erupt from her mouth and nose. On contact with the poison fumes, the air around the two exploded with a boof, burning the poison away, but setting both Heskin and Gash on fire. The two yelped loudly as they hit the ground. The rest of the group watched in horror as Gash and Heskin lay unconscious and on fire in the room. Fenton and Droven rushed to pat the flames out, while Breesis removed healing potions and forced them down their throats. As the magic of the potions took effect, they opened their eyes and escaped death.
I didn't think that would happen. Did I kill the dragon man?
Gash moaned. Heskin stood to his feet and continued to pat out the cinders. Thankfully not. You're extremely reckless, Gash. You could have killed us both, and now you've cost us resources. Well done, he responded.
Sorry,
she said with her head hung low. Suddenly, the door on the western wall burst open. 3 dog-sized rats charged the group, obviously drawn by the noise that had just been caused in the main room. Behind them came another rat, one that stood out among all the other rats they'd seen so far. This one was monstrous, nearly 6 feet in length and no less than 200 pounds. Its fur was tattered and torn, with finger-sized warts growing off of it in all directions, and massive oozing boils dripping as it ran. As the rats ran, one of the initial 3 fell victim to the trap directly in front of the door, falling 15 feet with an audible crack as its neck broke on impact. The other 2 and the monstrous rat leaped over the pits and assaulted the group. The first leaped at Breesis, catching her in the lower back with a bite and digging its claws into her buttocks. She yelled in pain and began to punch and claw at the rat in an attempt to get it off of her. Fenton threw his body to the ground. His form shifted and cracked, changing into that of a giant brown-furred wolf spider, nearly as large as the rats. He then skittered up the northern wall and watched the combat unfold. Heskin shouted a holy prayer and brandished his mace, causing it to glow and giving the blind sight once more. The second of the smaller rats engaged Meepo. The two began trading blows, but neither landed more than a glance off of each other. The bloated rat rushed Droven, who took a defensive stance with both weapons out and ready. He called out to Gash, "You can do this, Gash! Come quickly and fight by my side." Without a second thought, Gash charged alongside Droven with her axe at the ready. Without regard to its own safety, the large rat lunged, taking both an axe blow and a rapier to the shoulder before biting down hard on Droven's thigh, where it began to shake its head vigorously like a crocodile. Breesis had finally managed to shake the rat from her butt. She turned around and breathed deeply, inhaling to an unnatural point and belting out a yodel that erupted with a thunderous force, sending the rat sailing into the pit behind it. Heskin rushed to Breesis' side. When he arrived, he dropped his shield and began to pray over her, unleashing a burst of healing energy that filled her wounds and sealed them closed. Meepo was on his back. The rat landed a lucky blow, knocking him over completely, and now attempted to end the scrawny kobold. Seeing this, Droven broke from the bloated rat and bounded over one of the open pits, coming down on it with both weapons, driving them deep into the creature's body. It screamed and hissed only momentarily as it faded from consciousness. Gash chopped like an animal at the largest of the rats. It ruthlessly bit and scratched her as she clearly struggled to maintain balance as it continued its assault. From the ceiling, Fenton wove a web with both of his hind legs, passed it to the front, and hurled it at the rat below. He hit spot on, and within seconds the struggling and massive beast had bound itself into almost complete submission. Gash took the opportunity to rear back and coup de grace the creature, tearing its body in half and causing its innards and a geyser of rot-scented black pus to spray up and down her front side. The group stood quiet for almost a full, pant-filled minute before Gash finally spoke.
Well, that was close, huh?
The rest of the group groaned before Fenton, Heskin, and Breesis weaved their final ounces of magic into healing to ensure they didn't die from infection. Droven then poked his head into the room where the rats had just come from moments before. The stench of rotting meat suffused the air, rising from much chewed carcasses of several cave rats, smaller vermin, and some suspiciously humanoid-looking bodies. The cadavers laid upon a floor of filth, old bones, and hair combined to make a particularly large and vile nest. The northern wall was smashed, revealing a small, rubble-strewn alcove. The group entered and began to search the room. Fenton and Heskin took to the nest. Among the corpses, they identified 2 goblins, a kobold, and an elven man wearing brown studded leather armor. Upon closer inspection, Heskin removed a ring from the man's left index finger. "Hey guys, this ring has the name Caracas engraved onto it. I think that's the ranger Mayor Vunor told us about," he said. The rest of the group joined him and mutually agreed that this was indeed the body of the ranger, killed by the rats at some point in the last 2 weeks or so. The group then looted a hefty amount of silver and gold, and some other trinkets of value that were hidden among the nest before deciding that in order to ensure their survival, they would need to sleep for the evening in the once rat-infested room. They tossed the corpses into the pits below before closing and barring the door. They then took turns tending to the remaining injuries they had, eating and sleeping while they could, in preparation for a day that was sure to be ripe with goblin encounters. I'd like to once again give a huge thank you to all of my viewers and subscribers. I can't wait to read your comments and hear your feedback about this episode. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and click the bell icon for up-to-dates as soon as I upload new content. Stay tuned for episode 4, part 4, The Sunken Ruins, as it will launch early next week. Until next time, my friends, be well and roll 20s.